This is Tyrese Haliburton, and you're listening to Setting the Pace.
We now welcome on Keith Smith from Spotrac, host of the NBA Front Office Show, and no stranger to setting the pace. Keith, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, always a pleasure having you on. So, Keith, we're about roughly, depending on which team you are, anywhere between 10 or so games into the season. What has been your early thoughts on the Indiana Pacers so far? Give me maybe one thing you liked and one thing you haven't.
Yeah, the like is probably coming more in the recent games. It's the young guys like really stepping forward. Like Bennett Mathurin is proving to be an absolute killer, right? Like he is just. I think it was last year he was like on one of those games where he was just on a scoring binge, and I had put out there like if he was on a like truly awful team where it's just like here's 30 shots a night, he could lead the league in scoring. Like he's just that kind of shooter scorer. He's got that much confidence. Not that he's not a good scorer in the current setting, but there's a couple more mouths to feed, and he's not going to be able to chuck so many bad shots if he was on a tanking team. So I like that. I like seeing Jarris Walker get some run. I think Ben Shepherd is starting to come around a little bit here. So that part is good. What I don't like is the necessity for some of those guys having had to take on more minutes due to some of the injuries and the like. So that's been a little rough. And one thing I really don't like, sitting like middle of the pack in pace. Like what are we doing? Like that what made this team so special a year ago was flying up and down the court. So I'd like to see him get back to that.
Well, we'll stick on that because I'm a little curious. The Pacers' pace did slow down once they did trade for Pascal Siakam, and I know that they've implemented some new rules here in the NBA with a little bit more physicality, not as much freedom of movement. So, do you think those two factors are maybe what's holding the Pacers down, or are you seeing something else with this team?
Yeah, I think part of the challenge is I think they've struggled to just in general get the ball. Like I think that's been a little bit of a problem. And when you're not getting the ball like live and able to get off and running that way, that can be a challenge. The last I checked, and I think it's still true, they're near the bottom of the league in defensive rebounding percentage, and that's a huge part of getting out and running, right? Everybody thinks it's always forcing turnovers, but sometimes it's just getting stops and going. And the Siakam thing is so weird to me because one of his skills is that he can rip and run off the board. So it never has really made sense to me that, but he he seems to be doing that less and less and less. And part of that's probably he's aging and he is a pretty good half court player. So I think there's a combination. Plus teams know now, right? So teams are going to come in and try to, I think, artificially slow things down with a bunch of tricks and games and just making sure they're sending guys back and all that. But I do think some of it is they've just slowed down. Like I know that seems silly to say, but it's like sometimes the simplest answer is the correct one, and it just seems like they're just simply playing slower.
Talking about the pace and playing a little bit slower, with playing slower comes a little bit less possessions, therefore less scoring. Indiana last year led the NBA in scoring and was one of the most prolific offenses we've seen in quite some time. This year, they're actually currently at eighth in scoring. Do you feel it was necessary for maybe the scoring to come down a little bit if the defense can improve a little bit? And so far, we have seen the defense improve a bit, but obviously it's not Indiana's identity.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes teams make is when they go away from what made them special. The very recent example that I like to use for this was the New York Knicks a few years ago when they were like this defensive monster and it was just like impossible to score on them, but they had trouble scoring themselves. So one of the things they did was they signed Evan Fournier. And what you did was in that transaction, he's not a good defender. So you took away from what made you special. You didn't offset it enough with offensive improvement. So that's the thing I worry about a little bit with the Pacers. I think you've changed a little bit your offensive style, but unless you make a big jump defensively, which they in my opinion, have not made yet. Like it's like baby steps forward. And some of that is injury related, I think, and not having some of the right personnel that they thought they might have out there causing that. But like, I don't like when teams take away from what makes them special. It's really hard to be a top 10 team in both functions, both offense and defense. And if you're not going to be, then stick with what makes you really good. Well, if that's being kind of the offensive lean, stick with that. That's okay. But I'll also couch all this with what you said to begin. We're like 10 games into the season, so a lot of this is, small sample size theater that we're playing.
Speaking of, doing what you do great, right, and sticking with it, Tyrese Haliburton is one of those players that I think has been a little bit perplexing the first 10 games of the year because he's had some big moments, right, but he's also had some games where you're like, what is going on with this guy? So from what you've seen from Tyrese, I mean, obviously coming off a great game against the Knicks on Sunday night, but overall this season, what are you seeing different about the way he's playing this season?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to keep going to the same well over and over again, but the pace, obviously, right? It's not as much get out and go, go. But a lot of it is the jump shot, and nothing looks functionally different to me. Like it looks like he's still shooting the same way. And now it's funny, now that he's not shooting it great, we're starting to have a lot of people, oh, he's got a weird shooting form and all that. We didn't say that last year. Like weird shooting forms to me are one of those things where if the guy can, one, get the shot off, two, it's repeatable, and three, obviously it goes in. I don't care what it looks like. Kevin Martin was in the league for like a decade plus with that goofy, weird slingshot windup, but shot great. So who cares? It doesn't really matter what it looks like. It's just not going in. That's the part that's a little weird to me. And now it's like he's this so far this year, again, small sample size, but he's become like this crazy street shooter where it's like make a few, then miss a whole bunch in a row. Then he makes some in that. So that part's been a little odd to me. I know I haven't checked recently, so it's probably something I should take a look at, but it seemed to me like his finishing was down around the rim as well. I don't know if that's continuing to hold. I probably should have prepared a bit better and looked at this, but yeah, and it is now up again to kind of a little bit more where we expect. So that part seems like it's coming around. So hopefully that's just a sign of it was a slow start and it's all starting to come around for him. I will say this too, outside of his own scoring game, it seems like he is getting off the ball earlier in possessions, which can be a good thing at times. But again, he's what makes this team special. So when you're getting off the ball and ceding those half court possessions to other guys, sometimes it turns into crosses half court, pitches it to somebody, and then he's just not involved the rest of the play. And that kind of leaves me feeling a little off about it, because this is a guy who's one of, if not the best playmakers in the entire league.
I'm right there with you that, I enjoy Tyrese having the ball in his hand a little bit more, because I feel like while he is a good 3-point shooter, he has not been this year. And we're talking about, the previous years, he had been, for the most part, a 40%, career 3-point shooter. But his recent performance against the New York Knicks has left a lot of the fan base encouraged that he could be able to get back on track. Shot the 3-ball real well. Overall, 35 points, really good game. But a player who has not looked the same as he did in the playoffs, Andrew Nembhard. Obviously, Nembhard exploded, onto maybe the household name scene against Boston without Tyrese Haliburton last year in the playoffs. This year, Haliburton's back. Nembhard seems, he has not been able to capture that type of explosive play that we saw. I mean, do you think that was more of just hey, this is the perfect type of situation, him having the ball in his hand, and he doesn't normally have it when Tyrese is there? Or do you think there's a way for Nembhard to be able to still take that big step forward with Tyrese Haliburton in the lineup next to him?
Yeah, I think what happened with him in the playoffs was we all started thinking like, all right, this guy did great for the Pacers to have him, but there could be a world where down the line he's like, we got to get him his own team because he's this terrific on-ball lead playmaker. I think what we've seen this year and even at times last year, it might be his best fit, maybe like really good third guard who's like a combo guard and can play either with the ball in his hands or play off the ball. So that's, I think, what we're going to have to see. And it can be really hard, especially for a very young player, especially for a point guard, to be thrust into, you're the guy, then pulled into, all right, we're going to kind of put you back into, because it's not even really a secondary role, because now that you're not the lead ball handler, you're kind of dropped into like the third or even fourth role on the team, because, right, we're going to have Haliburton's going to have it a lot. Siakam's going to have it a lot. They want to make sure you get Miles Turner's touches to keep him involved. You're going to make sure you get Neesmith. Then when you get Mathurin in the game, you're going to make sure he's got the ball and is able to do things. So there's just a lot of mouths to feed. So he just kind of drops into this really kind of like fourth or fifth player type role in a lot of lineups. And that can be really hard for a guy to adjust back to. Again, I think he played 7 games before he got hurt. So we'll see what that looks like. So I'm not, by no means am I out on Andrew Nembhard. I just want to see, can you kind of rediscover what made you a really fun player before Haliburton went out, when it was like you had kind of adopted into this role, but that was also with other guys out too. So we're going to find out, like, can he go back to a slightly lesser role or not?
And you didn't even bring up T.J. McConnell as well, another point guard that loves to have the ball in his hands and really isn't very much of a threat without the ball in his hands because of his lack of shooting.
That's a great point.
There's just a lot of guys on this team that really can play that prominent one position and deserve a lot of minutes. So it is kind of a weird fit, but I do think that the Pacers obviously got to play their best 9-10 guys in the rotation. And if that means someone has to sacrifice a little bit, I think that's what you have to do. But you bring up Neesmith, you bring up Nembhard here, talking about injuries. It just seems like injuries across the league are out of control this year. I was going through last night looking at guys that have either not started playing this year because they've been hurt throughout the offseason, or they've missed time already. And I looked at 1 to 2 weeks, and you're probably looking at close to 60 plus players that are going to miss 1 to 2 weeks at minimum. So it's just bizarre to me. Do you have any idea what is causing this, uptick in injuries across the league?
It's a great question, Alex, and it's a really timely question. So, like I said, I was at this event at Arizona State, and there were a ton of NBA people there. The number one topic, we were all just hanging around talking, was, well, the number one topic was, are the Bucks going to figure this out? The number two topic was, what is going on with the injuries around the league? And nobody has like a silver bullet, right? It's this one thing is causing it. But there's the two kind of things that kind of go, if you think about it, kind of hand in hand. One is everybody now in the league is asked to do more, meaning you got to play like 40 feet. In all directions in the NBA now, especially on defense and on offense. If you look, we actually ran this on our show today on Front Office Show. The miles traveled per game by teams is way up over what it was 10 years ago. And who knows how far it's up from 15, 20, 30 years ago. Like that's, probably a really ridiculous number. So I think what we're seeing is players are being asked to do a lot more. But the real absolute number one consensus thing was, by the time these guys get in the league, anywhere from 19 to like 24 years old, they've already played hundreds, but more like thousands of games in their life. We take, especially the US born players, we take them from age 8 to 10, and it's like sport specialization, play one sport, practice 4 to 5 nights a week. And then these AAU basketball tournaments are play 4 to 8 games in a weekend. And I might even be a little light for some of the guys, especially if they play like I play up in age group 2 and in my age group and those sort of things. So that turns into it's repetitive overuse injuries because you're not playing basketball in the winter and then baseball in the spring, and then I go play football or soccer in the fall or whatever it is. They're playing one sport all the time. And one thing everybody's saying is these kids, by the time they get to college, a lot of them are coming out and being like, man, like they really ramped down in college. Like you don't go crazy, 4 nights a week playing super hard in practice. And then, a million games on the weekend, you play like 2 games a week and 3-4 practices, a week around those. And some of them are kind of lighter because you just played a game. And then they get to the NBA and it's like, wow, you really never practice. But by the time they get there, they're already beat up and worn down. So that's something that a lot of people are like, we got to fix this at the grassroots level. The problem is how, right? Because there's so much money involved in this. And so many of the parents and stuff have been sold the dream of, hey, you got to start early. And if you don't, specialize early, do extra trainings and all this stuff, your kid's not going to get a D1 scholarship. And that's not unique to basketball. That's soccer, baseball, every sport is like that as you talk to people. And as a parent myself, I see it, firsthand. We're even feeding the monster a little bit on the soccer side ourselves. So it's just really tough. I think that's kind of the two things that go hand in hand with this. I openly reject that players are soft and they don't want to play and all this other stuff. Because like we all saw what happened to Chet Holmgren. Like I don't care if that happens in 2024, it happened in 1984. You're out for, several weeks and months, if you get dropped like that. It's just, it's just a matter of, things happen sometimes, but I don't think guys are soft and weak and all the other nonsense that some of the old heads like to throw out there.
Yeah, it's just tough. And I think another thing, a little bit of an off topic is, we've been talking about how in the US they're playing so many games as a kid that they're not learning the skills. I know this is unrelated to injuries compared to some of the Europeans that are like, maybe they have one game, 2 games a week, but you're practicing the game a lot and learning the game. Where I feel like a lot of players now are coming in, well, I'm a scorer. Well, not everybody could be a scorer. And then it's really tough to find a role in the NBA. I think we're also experiencing that for a lot of young players.
Yeah, there's definitely some of that. And the worst is I'm a scorer and I get my 25 a night on 35 shots. And it's like, okay, you're not a scorer. You just shoot a lot, right? Like anybody can score if they just shoot a lot. Like and I'm with you. There's a lot of things that we could and should be doing better in all sports here, but really focused on basketball. There's a lot of room for skill development, growth, team play that we just don't necessarily get to because the culture is games, and that's tough. I'm forever hopeful that someone will find the right mix and balance, and we'll get it right. But it's we are where we are right now.
It's true, but going back to that topic for injuries, I mean, do you think the amount of injuries that are coming, that are showing up in the league right now is maybe potentially discouraging teams from being able to trade some depth pieces? For instance, you look at a month ago, Indiana looked like they had a great situation at center. You have Miles Turner, Isaiah Jackson, and then James Wiseman could be brought along slowly. Maybe you could really develop them. All of a sudden, in a blink of an eye, I mean, 2 Achilles tears, and now you're down to just Miles Turner, and it looks like there's not really any sexy names out there on the free agent market to bring in a center. Do we think some of these injuries could have teams saying, well, you know what, maybe we want to hold on to this player instead of receiving a second-round pick or anything like that?
Yeah, it's a great point, and you put it kindly. It's not that there's not really any there are no sexy names. There's not even 2 a.m. last call at the bar sexy names on free agency right now, right? It's rough out there. So it is. I think the challenge right now is, to your point about trades in general, I think teams are a little one, we're not even in trade season, right? Like, half the league, because they signed the summer, can't be traded. But I think we're going to see a slower than usual trade market, if only because half the league is like right around the luxury tax. The other half of the league is hard capped. Well, I shouldn't say the other half because it's some of the same teams. But like, let's say the Pacers are like, hey, we have the ability. Let's go get ourselves a $7 million center, right? We can make that happen by trading, somebody who's at the end of the bench or whatever. The challenge is if you do that and you bring in a $7 million guy and you send out, let's say, $5 million in that trade, you hard cap yourself at the first apron, and that makes it really hard. Or flip side, let's say you're trying to send out a $10 million player to get that $7 million player. The other team might be like, yeah, we're already over the first apron. We can't do it because we've made their rules so constrictive on these teams that it's really tightened everything down, that I think we're going to see trades really be kind of just not all that big this year. There will still be trades, don't get me wrong, and they're going to be complicated. And again, the event I was at, it was a bunch of college students, and they pulled off 43 trades in the span of 5.5 hours across covering all 30 teams. So if they can figure it out, I would hope NBA general managers can. And before people say, well, they were probably just doing whatever, they weren't. They were following the exact trade rules that are in the league. That's what the event was about. But yeah, it was it's tough. It really is tough right now. So I think you're going to see it be a little harder on that. And I think some teams are going to say, yeah, we're just better off rolling with what we got, especially if we actually like the players. Like, we're probably not best off to say, all right, let's do a consolidation 2-for-1, 3-for-1 trade or anything like that. Not to mention just the cap machinations you have to go through to make it work.
I have to ask you because the Pacers are in a weird spot with their center position, right? And there was one rumor that I heard there from David Thorpe on Kevin O'Connor's show where he said he had heard JaVale McGee was the name for him. Me and Facci went through a list of players they could potentially maybe trade for at some point. And a couple of names that were very cheap options to me were Bruno Fernando in Toronto and Duop Reith with the Portland Trailblazers. Two guys that I thought could make some sense as like a backup big if you need one in a case of an emergency. But is there any name out there that sticks out to you maybe as a good option for the Pacers?
Yeah, Reith's not a bad one. I think the Trailblazers' plan, though, is to move one of the other bigs. Probably going to be Robert Williams. He's back. He's playing. He's on a pretty tradable contract. He's shown that he's healthy for now. We know how that goes with Rob. But I think they'd like to move him, and then Reith moves into that kind of third spot. And then eventually, if DeAndre Ayton moves along, then I know they feel comfortable with him being ultimately the backup to Donovan Clingan. But if you could get him, yeah, that's a great guy because it's not going to cost you that much to get him, and he doesn't cost that much in salary. Who is the other one that you mentioned?
Bruno Fernando with Toronto.
Yeah, I mean, sure, I guess. Like, I mean, I get it for the Pacers right now. It's like, hey, well, it's better than Obi Toppin and a bunch of guys who are 6'4", and your neighbors to the south in Oklahoma are like, hey, we started Jalen Williams, not the big one at center tonight, because the big Jalen Williams is still hurt. So I think they're kind of in a spot where it's like, yeah, we got to figure it out. You guys might be like the last dogs in the junkyard fighting over the scraps on the bone over what's left at the center spot right now. But it is funny, the name that keeps coming up, and as you guys know, I'm based in Orlando. The name that people keep looking at, old Pacers friend Goga Batadze. People are like, oh, well, we'll go get him. And I'm like, the Magic aren't trading him. They have their own injury issues up front, and they love him, and they have him on that contract for exactly this reason, because we need to plug him in. He just goes in, he does a really nice job, and off we go. So I'll just put that out there for anybody maybe dreaming about a reunion in Indiana, or anyone else listening. That's probably not going to be a thing.
It's just, first of all, hey, hats off to Goga. He played a pretty good, performance against Indiana last time. Had like a double-double, a couple blocks. It's good to see him like have a consistent role with Orlando. Yeah. But next, talk about some of those names that you mentioned. I mean, when Alex and I brought up this list, it was almost like a joke to be like, well, back in 2015, this player, it's like, you're not getting the 2015 version of any of these guys. It's not going to be the JaVale McGee of 2015 or like a Frank Kaminsky of, 2017. So it's just very.
Let me pause real quick there. That's a name I would actually consider if I was the Pacers, because I think he fits stylistically the way, at least offensively, the way they want to play. You don't have to change anything. You can keep running all the same stuff you run for Miles Turner or with Miles Turner, because that's what he does, right? He's a floor spacing big. So I just wanted to say that's the one name that after Wiseman and then Jackson went down, within like a week or so of each other. I was like, that's the one guy. And the other thing for the Pacers, they are sitting on that open roster spot. So you don't even have to make a trade to get, some of these guys. But your bigger point is the more salient one, where it is like, yeah, this is, you're going to recognize a whole bunch of these names, but then let's also recognize there's a reason they're unsigned on November 11th, as we record.
No, it's true, because I mean, Jahlil Okafor is someone who's with, Indiana, their G League team. It's just like, but I mean, is it going to move the needle at all? Yeah. It's hard to even imagine that. But transitioning over to a team that doesn't seem to be having much problems at all, it's the Cleveland Cavaliers. They are 11-0 right now. How much of a real contender do you feel that they are? Are we going to remember that they're even 11-0 at the end of the year, because there's still so much time to play and you want to peak at the right time? Are they real to you?
Yeah, I think so, because I think Kenny Atkinson's got them doing some stuff that they didn't do before. And again, I don't want to make everything in this whole league about health, but it really is. And last year was just such a mess for them health-wise that it really kind of fell apart. And I think JB Bickerstaff, it was probably time, right? We all know eventually at a point where the same voice can't be the same voice, and you got to change things up. But I think he took a hit for a team that just wasn't healthy. That was a big part of it. But I think one of the things Atkinson has done really well is, he starts the game with the kind of core four guys, Mitchell, Garland, Mobley, and Allen. But when they go into their sub patterns, he always has one of the guards and one of the bigs on the floor at all times. And that just leaves tremendous lineup balance, because almost whoever you put around those guys fits really well. And they've got a lot of role players that just know, hey, my job isn't to come in here and outside of Karis LeVert, who you guys are familiar with, he likes to shoot. But outside of the other guys, like outside of him, everybody's like, yeah, my job is play defense, rebound, and hit open shots when the ball comes my way. And then LeVert gives them just every good team always has like that one dude who's like, all right, we need 25 tonight. Let's go. I got you. Jump on my back. And he's very willing to do that. So it's a smartly built roster, really well coached under Atkinson. I believe that they're going to be a really tough outcome playoff time.
Yeah, and I mean, we got to just talk about Ty Jerome has been shooting incredibly well for them, like out of nowhere. So, and they've been without Max Strus, so they do have at least one key player that's been hurt. So, but they are rolling. I thought they might be a little bit slow to start just because of the new coaching addition, but I'm happy to see them playing well, taking advantage of their lighter schedule, and it's good to see small market teams doing well. But another small market team that really is on the flip side of that is the Milwaukee Bucks. They are a small market team with a superstar player, but my God, it is horrific how things have started out for the Bucks this year. And I'm just curious. I mean, can they come back from this start, or is this a team that you feel like they're probably going to blow it up by the trade deadline?
Oh man, there's like miles in between those two realities, but they can come back, right? Because would it surprise you if they ripped off a 4 or 5 game win streak? No, right? Because you look, they got Giannis, they got Dame. There's some good players there, so that's the thing. Where like if you said to me like, "Hey, the Washington Wizards just won 5 in a row," I'd be like, "Wait, what happened? Are they in the G League right now? Like wow, how did this come about?" So now, with all that said, I don't think that's going to happen with the Bucks. When I watch them play, the number one thing that stands out to me, they just look old. They look old and they look slow. Giannis used to be the best player in the world for a little bit there on both ends of the floor. And he's not that on defense anymore. He just doesn't, whether it's he can't bring the effort to also bring that effort on offense as he's aged, or if he's just kind of not as engaged anymore. And when you watch them play, Damian Lillard is awful. Boston played them on Sunday, and in the second half, when the Celtics were having a comeback and then they ultimately took control, they ran somewhere between 12 and 15. It ended up being 15 straight possessions where Damian Lillard was defending on ball and they either shot on him or drew a double team and passed and got an open look out of it. All 15 possessions. They didn't score in all 15, but resulted in a good shot for the Celtics. That's like playoff level of targeting one player that you don't see in the regular season like that. But the Celtics were, let's go, let's play. You want to keep him on the floor. And the downside is he didn't do anything to offset that on the other end, because usually, all right, Dame gives up 25 on defense, but he's going to get you 30, 35, 40 between his own scoring and creation ability on offense. Him and Giannis don't fit together. Giannis doesn't want to roll hard to the basket, and he doesn't want to set a bunch of hard screens. So that's a problem going that way. Dame doesn't want to set any kind of screens at this point in his career, and he doesn't want to pop off them and play off the ball like that. So when your two best guys don't really fit together to run two-man actions, that's a huge problem. They've got Brook Lopez not playing in his best scheme, which made him almost defensive player of the year a bunch of times, which is that straight drop coverage. Doc has him trying to get out to the arc more. It's just a real mess. And here's the thing: you asked, do they blow it up by the trade deadline? Well, there's no easy outs, right? Because Brook Lopez might have a trade market because he's an expiring contract. Who wants Chris Middleton at this point? Like, that looks really rough with all the injuries. Someone would obviously, if they said, hey, Giannis told us he doesn't want to be here and he's on the table, of course, the other 29 teams would call and be like, hey, is our offer good enough? And then Dame, I don't know if it's the other 29. It might be more like 20 at this point. There might be a handful of teams that are like, yeah, it doesn't really fit for us at now with what he is. That's where it starts to get really tough. And that's without getting into all the rest of the guys who are kind of just guys on that team.
I think they just didn't have an offseason at all. I mean, there was really no upgrades. You saw the rest of the Eastern Conference for the most part, take a step forward. A lot of teams. And I feel like Milwaukee really stayed put. Gary Trent Jr. kind of fell into their lap, and that seemed like kind of the best they could do. But yeah, I think
he's been awful.
Yeah, they got lucky that was a minimum signing because that's all they could really afford. But yeah, I do think they're in a lot of trouble with just an aging team, and I think Giannis is a guy that really wants to win and be great in this league, and I think he kind of sees the writing on the wall here. But
let me jump in on one point on that. this is how it's going to end for a lot of these second apron teams. It's going to end extremely ugly because it's going to end with we got to trade off our big money guys. And what you hope for, if you're a fan, if you can be really honest, is I hope we can trade them while they still have really good value, and more not than having to trade them at a neutral value or even at a loss, because that's when it's going to get really messy for those teams. If you're sitting on, man, this guy still has 3 years left on his contract and we just have to get off this money, that's where it's going to be really tough. But these second apron teams like, Phoenix, if Phoenix stays together, will probably end that way for them because you got some older players. Boston's a little bit younger with their core guys, but you still have guys like Drew Holiday, Al Horford. Kristaps Porzingis is probably going to age not so great just with all the injuries he's had. So it's probably not going to end great for them either. So it's going to be tough. Now, that's not to say like Celtics won a title. Phoenix is playing really well. It can be worth it if you do it the right way, right? That's not to say you can't do it, but it's just if you think it's going to be like all rainbows and sunshine all the way through, it's probably not going to be.
No, it's not. And the thing is, like with Milwaukee, you look at them and it's like they won a championship. Middleton gets re-upped. He gets a new deal like that. You make that trade for Damian Lillard. It's like that championship was already a couple of years ago, and I don't see Milwaukee getting back to being like a true championship contender. There's no small move that they can make to get out of this. But a team that is looking to try and go for a championship, the New York Knicks, their offseason, I mean, they made not just one splash, at least two. You bring in Mikal Bridges, you bring in Cat. Sitting at 4-5 right now. I mean, what do you think? A lot of season to play. What were your thoughts on the Knicks offseason moves and where they're at right now?
Yeah, I'm not comparing them to the big three Heat in terms of star power and talent, but let's remember that big three Heat team was like 5-5, 10 games in, and everybody's like, oh, this doesn't work. And then they proceeded to kind of rampage through the conference the rest of the way. I don't think the Knicks are going to move into rampage mode, but they're going to be better. They'll figure some stuff out. I do think if Mitchell Robinson is healthy, I think what Tibbs is going to do is he's going to put him right into the starting group, and he's going to move Cat and OG down a position, bring Josh Hart off the bench. I think that just brings a lot more lineup balance, but most importantly, their rim and interior defense stinks. You guys just watched it. I mean, the Pacers ran a layup line on them all game long when they just played, and that's because Cat is – I just heard this. It was Tim Bontemps shared this stat. Players – I don't know if this included the last game or not, so I apologize on that. But they were like 32 of 35 against him at the rim. Like how that's like you did where in the three must have just been blown layups or something, because like how can you be that bad? Like you're 7 feet tall. At least get your fingertip on one of those and block it away or something. And that's good. That's trouble for them because Jalen Brunson, for all that he is wonderful at, he's just not a good defender. So a lot of guys either overpower him or they get by him. And then waiting for them is Cat, who's just letting guys stroll to the basket. So it's really tough. It's almost, I hate to put it this way, I almost don't really care how good you think your perimeter defensive trio of Bridges, Anunoby, and Hart. And I've been saying for a while, I think Anunoby's overrated as a defender, and I think Hart's more of a hustle type guy. I do think Bridges is a really good defender. But it's like, even if they were all world with those other two guys in the lineup, you're going to have problems, especially when the one can't kind of protect the way you need them to. So all that said, they're going to get better though. There's so much offensive talent there. I think they're still sorting things out. I think there's too many games where it's, well, Brunson's going to get his 20 shots. We got to make sure Cat gets his 20. Oh, but we got to get Bridges shots. Oh, we got to get Anunoby shots. And they're just trying a little too hard. So strike a little bit better lineup balance. Get maybe Bridges to be like, hey, I'll take a few less shots. It's okay. Like, it's for what's best for the team. And I think that their offense is going to be the way they can really win. But that's tough with Tibbs as your coach because that's not what he does, right? He's not a guy who's ever said, all right, let's be an offensive based team like that. That's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, they're an interesting team, and I did hear that stat that Bontem said today on the Hoop Collective. I believe it was around 89%. He mentioned that on NBA Today, and then it jumped up to like 92.3%. Like players are having conversions at the rim with Cat as the primary defender. And I think he was like Cam Thomas and another guard were like in that same like in terms of like contesting at the rim. It's like that just can't happen. I mean, it just can't. Cat has to be better, but there's a reason why Minnesota obviously brought in Gobert, because they knew Cat's not a long-term five. But don't want to touch too much on the Knicks. I do want to close things out here as we kind of get ourselves ready here for this Pacers Magic game on Wednesday. It'll be the third time they play in about like 15 days. It's crazy to see so many games against the same team early on. And Paolo looked great in game one. Then he gets hurt, didn't play in game two. You know, the Magic scared the Pacers a little bit there at the end of the fourth quarter, but Indiana pulled it away the last time. So they're down in Orlando for this one. What are your expectations for this game? And just what have you seen from this Magic team early on in the season?
Yeah, so for the Pacers side, these are the games you got to win, right? When you got an injured team that you are, when healthy, you should be kind of almost on par with each other. You need to win when you've got them without their best player, even if it is on the road. Like, and I realize the Pacers are banged up too. But they're not missing a Paolo Ban. They're not missing their Paolo Banchero. Yeah, whether you want to say that's Siakam or Haliburton, either way, you've got them. So they should win this game. From the Magic, I think with Paolo, they were finally starting to find that offensive like push and thrust that you had not seen from them, where it was like, hey, we can really do some stuff. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope has not made shots yet, but he's been a wonderful defensive addition with them. So they're just in a little bit of a weird place, because just as it felt like, all right, we got this, we're feeling pretty good, Paolo got hurt. And that's like the one spot where they just don't have a lot to go to, because you're kind of asking Franz now, like, all right, that's it, buddy. Like, you got to be it now. You're going to have to drive things, because Jalen Suggs is still really kind of learning. So what happens with them is they go through these offensive droughts where it's like, oh God, what is happening out here? Like, it's not are they not scoring? It's like they're not even finding incredible shots in these moments. And that's just really, really tough. So I think we're going to see a position for the Magic where you're going to see them probably try to junk it up a little bit, run some weird stuff, really try to kind of keep it a little slower. And this is one where I think Indiana, let's get out and run and try to run these guys off the floor, because that's probably your best bet. Because if this game's played up in the 120s, I don't know that the Magic have enough offense to keep up.
Yeah, I mean, I think they did what they could to try and steal that second game against the Pacers after they stole the first one. But overall, I think Orlando is going to figure it out. Tough to not have Banchero. Obviously, drop 50 on the Pacers the first time. It's a huge loss. But Keith, always appreciate you coming back on Setting the Pace. You always give some great insight around the league, not just the Boston Celtics or the Indiana Pacers. It's the NBA. So Keith, thanks for coming back on, but please tell everybody where they can find you on social media, some of the awesome content you're always putting out.
Yeah, you can find my written work on Spotrac.com, as well as the Basketball Bulletin. That's a newer project that we've started. Trevor Lane and I have started that. I've got basically each morning I write game notes from what I watched the night before in the NBA. Also over there, I'm doing a lot more in the draft this year. So I released my initial big board. If anybody wants to read that, just look up Basketball Bulletin Substack. It'll pull up for you and you can go find it. And it'll and then if you want to look at the big board, that's free and unlocked for everybody to look at. The first one I'll be doing an update hopefully later this week. And we've kept the Substack subscription price as low as we possibly are allowed to make it. So if you feel like it's worth paying for, we'd love it. And then NBA Front Office Show, Trevor Lane and I, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. Every Friday is a live show. We have a lot of fun over there. Today's episode wasn't so fun because we talked like 900 injury updates, which is not a lot of fun, but we have a lot of fun. We get a little silly sometimes, but our whole thing is hoops, not hot takes. If we say it's because we believe it. And then the Friday shows are really that's for the fans to ask questions, to comment. If they're mad, we let them vent, whatever they want to do. It's their show on Fridays, and we have a lot of fun.
Love it. Well, Keith, we look forward to having you back on. Pacers and Celtics, they will meet again. We'll be ready for it. Hey, it's 1-1 this year, and excited to see how this finishes out. So, Keith, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.